probably only fun for about a day. I'm an introvert, so spending time alone is something I need to recharge me, but after about a day, it got weird. See, I just recently ended 2 weeks of complete, just about 2 weeks of quarantine because I had COVID-19 symptoms. Test came back negative, and whether it was that or something else, praise Jesus, it looks like I'm on the mend now. But I had all these sort of surreal moments during this 2 week period. Moments where I could hear laughter behind me on the other side of this wall. My kids and my wife are laughing together, and especially early on in the quarantine, I would only come out with a mask on, and that was just to go to the bathroom. We did have some dinners those first few days, maybe on the porch, and I would be like off the porch or at a distance, because I couldn't wear the mask while I'm eating. And so I'd hear my kids laughing, and then 10 minutes later I'd be on Katie's Instagram story watching it happen. And I can still hear them laughing, and I'm listening to them laugh on my phone, and it was a surreal moment. And then there's moments where our door doesn't really shut and lock very well, and Daisy would push it open, and I'd be working, and she'd come in, and she'd be like, "Day!" And I love when she throws her arms up and says, "Day!" It's one of my favorite things to hear. But then I have to look at my daughter, who's not even a year old, and just say, "No, I can't pick you up." So my isolation is her isolation, and she doesn't understand it, and she would just cry and cry, especially those first few days. It got to the point Tate would come in beside my bed in the morning and be like, "Daddy, you still sick?" And I'd say, "Tate, you still can't be in my room. We can't really be around each other much." And he'd just put his head down and walk away. At 3 years old, he has a lot more understanding than Daisy, but I had to watch my kids struggle with this, and they can't even fully understand what's going on. And I'll be honest, my isolation wasn't that bad. I was really sick, and that's why I didn't even have a video up last week. And I was in bed, and I was short of breath, and had a lot of pains, but thank God things could have been much worse, and people are dealing with much worse stuff than me. So I'm not trying to throw a pity party. But what I will say is 2 weeks of quarantine gives you profound perspective. I mean, I was in a prayer meeting through Zoom on my phone, and I hear birds chirping behind someone, and I'm like, outside, I want to hear birds chirp. There's just all these little moments like that. And it left me thinking. It reminded me in a clear way that people face all sorts of isolation. Isolation has lasted far longer than what I've went through. People that have lived alone far longer. People that have been outside of community far longer. People that don't have significant relationships that anchor them in community that loves them. I've been blessed with great family and a great family in this house with a wife and kids, and I'm back with them now, so I'm not complaining. But I was reminded of the isolation that people must feel. See, whether it's through bad life circumstances or our sin and our shortcomings and our mistake or the sin of others, or probably a combination of all of those things, our sinful and broken world lets people fall to the wayside. It's not just today with our modern technologies and our modern culture, but people have always been isolated. People would always get ostracized. People would always fall out of the community. And I think people live with all sorts of isolation today, physically, emotionally, spiritually. People that don't just have physical social distancing now, but have been dealing with too much distance for far too long. It's not a new problem. Like most problems that we talk about in society, Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. I don't think there's a new problem. These problems pop up in different ways, and we're going through tragic, crazy, awful stuff right now. But yet, isolation isn't new. If you look at the Bible, there's people in the Old Testament and New Testament called lepers. And leprosy back then might not be exactly what we know as leprosy today. But the best we can tell, it might have been a whole wide range of skin diseases and deformities. So when we talk about people that are lepers in the Bible, they probably had some sort of rashes and deformities and bacterial problems eating away at their skin, and you could see patches and things going wrong with them. Leprosy, as we know today, can affect your nerves, and there's issues where you don't feel pain, and that can lead you to injuries or injuries happening. I mean, and you not being aware of it, and you get all sorts of awful, terrible things can happen. So when we talk about lepers in the Bible, they're people that you can picture deformities and horrible things going on with their body. And in the Old Testament, there was a purity that you had to come before God. There was a cleanliness that you had to come before God. A ritual purity, a ritual cleanliness. And there was all sorts of laws that you had to follow. Well, there were specific rules for the lepers. If you were a leper, you were deemed unclean and had to be away from the whole community of people. Couple reasons. One, if you have some sort of infectious disease and they didn't have a way to treat it or to help you as far as like medicine back then, because of that, you had to be separate. So you're separate from the people. So not only are you dealing with whatever disease and all the horrible things that come with that, but you're dealing with separation from the community, separation from the worship of the people worshiping their God. Physical, emotional, spiritual, all sorts of isolation happening in distance. It's those kind of lepers that we see in the Bible in Mark chapter 1. Jesus comes up to a man with leprosy. Mark 1:40. A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. "If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean," he said. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. "I am willing," he said. "Be healed." Instantly, the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. Then Jesus sent him on his way with a stern warning. "Don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed." But the man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in the secluded places, but people from everywhere kept coming to him. I'll be honest. Myself and other Christians don't have all the answers. I don't know why Jesus heals some people and doesn't heal others. I don't know how that all works. There's no mathematical formula. I'm not God, and I don't understand all and don't claim to. But I think what we see with Jesus in this moment is he goes to a man who's unclean. I mean, a leper in this time, you hear over the years, over history, that they'd maybe have a bell they'd be ringing so you know to stay away from them. I mean, probably a lot more than 6 feet. They would yell, "Unclean, unclean," so that you would stay away from them and you wouldn't potentially get whatever disease. There's churches made in medieval times in Europe that have holes in walls, and maybe for different purposes, but it's believed a lot of them, or at least some of the reason, was so that a leper could stick their head into a stone wall hole and watch a service from afar so they could be included somehow. This is the kind of person that dealing with some disease and sickness, but also has been deemed unclean and unfit to be with the people. That's the person who comes to Jesus. And Jesus, instead of running away, does what only God can do. Doesn't pray. He doesn't even say, "God, please heal this person," like we would. Instead, because he is God, because he's the God-man, he just puts his hand on him and says, "Be healed." Who knows how many years of isolation this man has went through. And Jesus, just in a moment, not only heals him of the physical temporary problem, but deals with the permanent problem that is the isolation of his soul. And that's where I find my answer. I don't know why Jesus does or doesn't fix certain temporary situations. There's all sorts of biblical theories and ideas and wisdom and perspective we could get into in a longer message, but to put it simply, I don't have ultimate answers other than to say that the promise that Jesus offers when he dies on the cross is I, in this moment, will take total separation and isolation and distance from God my Father. I will deal with the pain and the sorrow and the anguish. I will have my body ripped and shred and torn into so that you don't have to feel that isolation. I will feel the spiritual weight and depression and anguish so that you don't have to feel that isolation. God will turn his back on me, Jesus says, so that you don't have to feel that. In Revelation, we get this beautiful picture. I quote it a lot because it's just one of my favorite things in the Bible, where God gives us this beautiful picture of what's going to happen for those that are with Jesus. When God says there will be no more sickness, no more death, no more pain. I'm not dismissing the awful, tragic things that people are going through right now. And God doesn't either. I was reading in a book on prayer about how we think God shrugs at our problem. Does God listen when we call out to him? He does. People throughout the Old Testament call out to him, and God did show up as his son. The Son of God showed up and died on a cross, taking every sort of crazy, unimaginable physical pain, but also dealing with the emotional, heart-aching isolation as those who once praised him mocked him. As those that had the chance to have him released said they'd rather have another guy released and they say crucify him. Jesus dealt with every sort of isolation on the cross so that in him you would never have to feel that. Jesus leaves us with some responsibility. Matthew 7, verse 7 and 8. Keep on asking, you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. And to everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. The isolation you feel, the isolation that you maybe have felt for years, the ways that people have hurt you, the ways that people have deemed you unclean and unfit for their community, Jesus says, I will cross the gap. No chasm, no canyon, no valley, nothing can separate you from the love of God. If you put your faith in me and seek me, Jesus says, I took the isolation so that you will never have to feel it again. We have to find the peace that only Jesus gives us, the community that only Jesus gives us, the love that only Jesus gives us.